You know, building up a poem to a boffo last line is very important, isn't it, Ben? Do you feel that way too?
Or do you?
I like to do that.
I think it was, well, somebody said that a poem should die proudly.
Right. Beautiful.
So I like that. I think a sense of an ending is there, but not closure. You know that term? It's been used a lot. It should sort of resonate. It should never end like
thud.
Like a door slam?
Like a gong.
Right.
What are some of the mechanics that you get when we talk about working the poem out? I mean, do you ever get into the mechanics with your students, line structure, et cetera? So
what kind of things that you would
tell to? Okay, what are some of, suppose we had an exchange
just briefly, because we're running out of time, but
how would you
briefly
you handle that?
Well, that's it. We concentrate on the words and on the lines because it's there, where the poem is. We don't talk about intentions. We talk about what is there that the student has done, and you can deal with that. I don't know. Well, how do you?
Well, I think that sometimes it's good to have somebody else, such as Ben, an instructor, perhaps give you ideas that you wouldn't think of trying before. Such as one of the things that he's helped me with is to try a longer line. Sometimes, quite often there's too much emphasis on one-word lines. I'm going to make every word count all by itself out alone on the page, and instead you see them working in a line and perhaps working for a different sort of flow, a different sort of rhythm.
Good, and also the graphics on the page, maybe making that a little more interesting.
The point is, of course, that a shorter line means something, and a longer line means something. It's not just that you're. It's that when Jodi was writing these shorter lines, there was a kind of development and thickness of intention that was missing. And, poets. A lot of poets today don't even know what a line is. I mean, they just say, but then, and they just want to string something down the page. I mean, they don't really pay attention. And so if you pay attention to the students' work, you can help them.
Now, it's your turn to read a poem, too. I didn't forget that.
But before we go to this one, I just have one comment. I really felt, you mentioned the word resonance, which is something I've stressed when people have asked me about the poem resonating or reverberating. And I think that Jodi's work here has that quality very, very strongly. Was this always so, or was this something you really had to work on? Or?
I would say no, it was not natural. But I think that as you write and as you experiment a little bit with craft and with really being able to make the words say what you want them to say, then you're able to develop more layers of meaning and more sort of reverberations with the poetry.
Okay, Ben.
All right, here's a poem called The Sun Takes Us Away. It rained all night. It fell like applesauce on the brick porch. Now the street is naked and dripping. The cats unroll the yard and shake their wet paws. My theme, the sun, is anodized aluminum, a pink window pane. Come back, holy light. Drench mailboxes, Datsuns, Chevettes. The packages are moving. Throats are tightening with fear and excitement. The sun tips the pine needles. A terrible tolerance moves down driveways. Rain and light. The houses can't maintain their attention. Kind women stand combing their children's hair, but they drift. Light catches the corner of a table and draws them away. Nothing escapes. But we get up. We're freshly shaved. The dead tuck their hands in our pockets. They nestle inside our coats, and the vast light arrives, oars waving through the clouds.
Reminds me a little bit of Kenneth Ferry.
Jodi has a very, very lovely poem that we'd like to get in before we run out of time. We have about 6 minutes left. Let's hear that, Jodi, and then maybe we'll get another question or two in.
All right, this was a poem that was written for a little not so little anymore, a girl that I give writing lessons to. And this is something that she's talked to me about several times, and this poem was really written for her. It's called A Mother's Death. When Mother was sick, she sent Morgan and Jason and me outside to roll down hills, catching hay-colored grass and purple flowers in our hair, so that at 5 years, cancer seemed something made of sky and hot yellow splinters of sun. I picked sweet peas for Mother, purple-pink flowers in a glass by her bed, but she didn't see. Eyes closed, she sang, her voice dropping like petals in the room. It was a year before I knew she was dead. Knowing was a dark, sour taste on the roof of my heart. I only thought she was gone, and perhaps walking suddenly into her room one morning, I would catch her there, smelling of sweet peas, singing. I think that if I could, I would reach both arms around the waist of the world and squeeze it flat as a sky to make the dead sprout up.
Ben, I have a couple of quick questions for you. Yeah, I love that poem. Do you at all talk to your students about how they deliver their poems, how they perform them, apart from the writing on the page?
Yes. In fact, Jodi and I had a...
Yes, we had a marathon session the other day.
Well, she's such a good reader. I was wondering if that was something you talked about. There are many great poets, as you know. There were many great poets, and there are some good poets around now who are very poor readers of their work. I think they do their work injustice. You do talk about that.
Yes. And in fact, what I've been doing in the workshop, we started it the last time we had it, was I want the kids to stand up instead of just sitting there and reading their poems to the rest of us. We pass the poems around, of course, but they have to stand and deliver the poem as if they were giving a reading.
Yeah, good.
So we can listen to it, and then we can talk about how they delivered it. Because, they're going to be reading to other people if they're going to get a chance, and I think it's good to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the handicaps with not reading your poems out loud a lot is you rely too much on how it's printed on the page.
Yes.
And then when you start to read it to somebody, and this was something Ben and I were talking about on Thursday, you just sort of slur it all together, and you imagine that they're reading it and they're getting the lining, and that actually when you do read it, and this is something that I have not perfected by any means, but you have to try and guide them through it with your voice and show them how it looks.
Now, aren't there some risks involved with this? I know I'm a performance poet myself, and I do come out of a strong oral tradition, and I've found that there are dangers when you are writing. I've noticed that poets who are actors have this particular danger that all of a sudden they're writing scripts for themselves, and that there's a line of demarcation between writing a fine poem and being able to read it or recite it, as they call it when I was in school, and writing a script for yourself to perform.
Right. I think you have to write it as a poem first, and then learn to perform it, not the other way around. Don't write it as a performance and then try and make it into a poem.
Unless you want to be a performer, which is a whole other kettle of fish.
I even mentioned to Jodi and to others that I think actors make very poor readers of poetry. One of the reasons is that they make the speaker a character. And I think that character is not... And remember what I said, what I think matters in the poem is the language. And I found that most of the time when a poet reads his poems, and the way I read poems, I think... let's say the way I think it ought to be read, is you pay attention to the words. You're not creating a character unless you're a storyteller. And that goes back
persona is the popular
all right,
word?
if it's a persona, then, James Mason can do it, and other people can do it. And I pay respect to that. But that other side of it is what I...
We just touched on a very good subject for another show, and we're just running out of time. I wanted to very quickly let you get in a mention about some of the poets who've come out of the Cal State programs, and just quickly say that, and then I'm going to tell the listeners who's going to be on in future shows. So.
I guess the most well-known is Dan Halpern.
Oh, he did.
The founder, of Antaeus magazine.
I didn't know that.
And David Trinidad was there, and so was Rachel Sherwood.
Yeah, who's no longer with us, unfortunately.
No longer alive. Also, Harry Northup studied at Northridge with Anne Stanford. and Jodi Johnson.
in good company.
A new
Okay, we want to thank you. I think it was one of our best shows. I really enjoyed it, and it went by very fast. It was a very quick hour. I would like to mention again to the listeners that if there's anything you heard tonight that you'd like to have or any comment you want to make to either of the poets, please write us.
We'll be glad
care
to
of
forward.
The Poetry Connection, KPFK. It's the Poetry Connection, KPFK, 3729 Cahuenga Boulevard West. That's Cahuenga, Cahuenga Boulevard West, North Hollywood, California, 91604. North Hollywood, California, 91604. We are going to have one of our most important shows on January 7th. This was a taping we did way back in September. The taping was done while there were some performances going on nearby, so there is some music and noise, but it's worth it. Don't miss the Dennis Brutus program. That's on January 7th. Dennis Brutus is as many of you know, an exiled South African poet who recently won asylum in a court in Chicago. The U.S. government was trying to throw him out of the country. He won the case. Beautiful man who was tortured, shot in South Africa, etc.
And we're going to be discussing poetry with Dennis Brutus.
Yeah, great show. February 4th, we have two young black women poets, Michelle Clinton and Carol Chapman. We'll talk about being black and writing poetry in America, something one knows a little about. February 18th, Muses in Juxtaposition. A black group, Halima Brooks, Frank Jenkins, Kay McGee Anderson, and Dadisi on flute, and we'll have a performance there too. Another black poet. This is going to be a series South African. A Zulu poet, Mazizi Kuneni, teaches at UCLA, will be with us on March 3rd, and we have a whole series.
A Russian poet in exile.
Yeah, a whole bunch of people.
And a lot of people.
I'm going to have the very great Tom McGrath on in April. I'll be taping that in January. Fine poet, political poet. Great old guy, and I hope we do that taping. That's going to be in April, I hope. And Simon Ortiz will be with us later on. We have a lot of good shows coming. Please listen, write us. Thank you again, poets.
Los Angeles, this is the Poetry Connection signing off. Support your local poet, L.A.
Right.
What I was then must have been what I saw and remain. The reunion. It was not Rushville or Newcastle this year. Like wagons, a few steps westward we came, our names written on the sides of cars. Wallace, Lockridge, Campbell. This was not our small Indiana town, around which the usual farms, their windmills revolving like veins of gray paper, made us feel we had stepped into the backyard. This was Brown County, its dark hills pressed close as our safe fields, as if one day all the streets in town were suddenly filled with night, the houses lost, until what we knew simply disappeared, and what was home was now just hills and wind and secret sun, and the slow progress of a few roads. It was morning when the hovels began to appear.